before we start, let me just quickly say a few more words about what we do, because it may not be obvious from what the name says and what my name is and what the introduction is. Truth and Transformation is basically the title of a book. And that's where we got the inspiration for the name. The book is also written by the Indian Vishal Mangalwadi. And that book is one of the, I always say there's two types of books that Vishal writes. One is more directed towards the church. And this Truth and Transformation is more directed towards the church and Christians. And it talks about what is the identity of church in Scripture. So I've grown up in an evangelical, classical evangelical background. I was come from the Lutheran Church, actually, state church even in Germany. Then I studied in a seminary where every kind of people were, so Free Church people and State Church and Lutherans and Reformed and all kinds of people. And then I worked mainly in the Free Church area, but also in the State Church, Lutheran State Church, in the educational field. So I know a lot of different churches. And the thing that I found the most intriguing when I first met Vishal and heard about him and started reading his books is that the role of the church has and the role Christians have in society is much bigger than just bringing the gospel to people. So this may be something that is very normal for you. It was not for me back then. So because my focus was on mission. And of course I had read books that emphasize the fact that mission has to be holistic. It needs to include every aspect of life, and that God is a God who has created all of life, etc. But I hadn't really realized how much we had limited the perspective of church to the walls of the church and everything that happens inside of these walls. So even though some churches emphasize that there is a holistic perspective to church and church growth and mission, many, on the other hand, in practice, do not really do anything about the fact that we are called to be salt and light in the world, and to a world that is decaying without the light. Because if you think about that image, you understand that when there is no light, there is darkness. And when it's dark, you stumble into all kinds of things. You hurt yourself. You can't orient yourself. You don't know where you're walking, where you're going. You can't find things. You have a problem. And the same applies to salt. Salt is, most Western countries use salt mainly to give flavor to food. But actually in Jesus' time, salt had a lot of other functions that most of the Western people don't know. You may know from Africa. And so salt is something that conserves things from going bad, from going rotten. When you don't have fridges, you use salt because that will conserve things and it will save things. But it also has another function, which many people don't know, is when you have salt, that is something that can, for example, can clean a wound. And cleaning a wound from dirt and infectious potential will hurt. Because when you put salt on a wound, it will hurt, obviously. But it has the function of helping the healing process. And that is something that Christianity also is intended to be. It's intended to be something that may remind the world of where it is how life is supposed to be. And then that may sometimes hurt the world because it may remind the world of God's commandments, for example, which is one of the most basic construction ideas that God has given us. That sometimes hurts because the world is on a way into a different direction. So in short, what I learned when I started to look into Vishal is that the church has a much bigger role than just inviting unbelievers to become Christians, and do that in many ways, which is good and obviously is our task also, but it's not the only task we have. And the task goes much further than that. That's one thing I wanted to mention in the beginning, that this is my background. So I'm a good friend of Vishal, and Markus also is, and I know Markus Reichenbach, and Markus Geiger I only have written emails with. I have not met personally, but we've got Lord willing, we'll meet sometime. So, but the second background I just wanted to point out a little bit, because some of you may think, okay, what's this German guy talking about Africa? And you know, we are in Africa. We have a completely different situation here as you have. So 2 points concerning that. First, Truth and Transformation Europe is responsible for the development of this educational initiative. We call it the Third Education Revolution in Europe, but also in Africa. So I have been to Africa. I've studied in Africa. I have older kids that 2 of them actually live in Africa. One lives in Kenya, in Kisumu. That's my daughter of 19 years old. And my son with his family live in Addis, in Ethiopia. And I myself have been to Kenya, to South Africa, to Uganda. And I've been working with pastors there and with very down-to-earth people, but also with high government people and university people. So I know a little bit about Africa. It's not, for me, it's not the first connection with people from Africa. And just like 1.5 weeks ago, I was in Berlin at the National Prayer Breakfast and met a lot of Africans at the National Prayer Breakfast in Germany, which was such a pleasure. And I was hanging out with the Africans because I feel like an African. And my friend Vincent Anigbogu from Nigeria, who some of you may know, just last week said to me, you have a white face, but an African heart. So there must be something that connects me to Africa. And I have strong love for the countries in Africa, or for the people in Africa. And I have learned so much from my African professors, actually, that I never learned in university in Germany. Many things that are very important I learned from my African professors. So just to give you a little bit of a background additionally to the official paperwork that has been recited, this gives you a little bit more of background to me. Okay, now let's look a little bit at this topic, self-help cooperatives as a means of transformation, to look at the German roots of the cooperative movement. There are also other roots. There's not only German roots, but there's other roots. Because at about the same time as this happened in Germany, in many countries, things like the cooperative idea came up, and some of these were connected with each other, some were not. But it is indeed a very interesting phenomenon. So let me take you to the first man that is very important to the cooperative movement in Germany. This is Friedrich Wilhelm Raiffeisen. And when I talk about the cooperative movement today, I'm just only going to touch the tip of the iceberg, because there is incredibly much material on this. I've read some of it. I have not read all of it. There has been lots of reflection on this on a very high level, economically and also developmentally. But I'm just going to give you a first insight, and what I intend actually is to make you curious, so you go and find and study yourself more. Because what I can do is I can give you a first, I'm going to tease you a little bit and take you into this idea. And then I want you to continue digging into internet, books, whatever you can access best, and you will probably find very interesting information. This man, Friedrich Wilhelm Raiffeisen, was born in 1818 and died in 1888. He is closest to what we need and are looking at in the Third Education Revolution. This Third Education Revolution is actually a holistic approach to transform a nation by focusing on education in its broadest sense. Education is not only 6-year-old, 7-year-old sitting in a school and a teacher standing up front. Education is much more than that. education, in my understanding, includes every aspect of life, and it includes, for example, character development. A very important aspect actually of education is character development, which we have lost out of our concepts of education because we have been focusing on reciting and just rote learning of things that we just put down on paper because we have learned them by heart. Now we can write them down, so we're done. But that is not education. Education is much more than that. It also includes the facet of education of arts. It also includes the education of crafts. Many skills are included. All this is included in my understanding of education. So what we aim at is an education revolution that will put the church in a place where it will become an educational lampstand and an educational place. So imagine in your village or in your city where you live, that churches become places where everybody talks about these, not because they are evangelizing or they are doing good mission work, but because everybody knows if you go to this church, you will get really good education. You will find important information for life, for every section of life, information on agriculture, information on entrepreneurship, information on education of children, information and good information on family living. What is marriage? What is love? What is sex? What is a man? What is a woman? These questions today, society is kind of at odds and doesn't know how to answer these questions. So if you think of education that is much more than just little children sitting in school and learning how to read and write, which is also education. I'm not saying it's not, but it's much more than that. So Raiffeisen was a Christian. He probably was not an evangelical Christian in the sense we would use it today. But clearly he was biblically educated, and he knew the Bible. He probably had been trained in a Lutheran school or in a Catholic school. His aim was more than making money and food available. His aim was to transform society. And that is very, very fascinating, because if you start to look at that man, you find that he had character. And that's what we need to transform society. I can't emphasize that enough, because at the end of the day, if you have the best education, if you have the highest levels of degrees, but you have a flawed character, it will not take you anywhere and will not reform your nation. It will not change your nation, because you will be apt to corruption. You will be open to usury things. Many things will be happening that you won't be able to. You don't want to happen. These to happen. I will give you a list of sources that are available after this lecture, so you can go read yourself and find more information on what this is all about and what this Raiffeisen man has said. So you can start digging into yourself and continue and doing more of it. Okay. So if we look at the history of the background of his history, is you had farmers in that time in the 19th century in Germany, farming on small plots of land with little or no technology. Does that remind you of something? There's a lot of parallels to many African farmers today. Small plots of land, little or no technology. And then you have another consequence out of this. Because you are small, you have no bargaining power. So you can't negotiate prices with anybody, because you only have very little to give or to put into the bowl. So you have no bargaining power because you have small production quantities. Then what you also had at that time back then, usury banking. So it's banking that is, it's just not fair. So people were charging 20% and more interest rates. So obviously when you need to take a loan, I need to take up money from a bank, and you're unable to pay it, what happens is they just come and take all you have. So you need a loan, then they'll say, okay, you have to pay now and you don't have the money yet. So they come and take your cow. And you have to take another loan because you have less animals. So, and this is a vicious cycle of debt and more debt. So this is what was the case back then when Raiffeisen was living, and he saw that happening. And additionally, and some of this is very applicable today, especially, little or no access to financial services today. So some of you may just say, okay, I have no access to financial services. How do I do? How would I get a loan? I may not even be able to get one because there's no place where I can get one. The markets are increasingly globally oriented. That's a factor that is working against small farming and against rural small farming, especially because you have transportation and then distribution, and then you have other problems associated with that because the globally oriented market will just drop the prices because of the amount of the large quantities that are being negotiated. Then you have technologies that are very complex and that alter rapidly. That is the standard today. And if you want to keep up with the market, you need to, invest all the time in order to be up to date to what's being requested. And food and agriculture supply chains are very fragmented. That makes it hard to really get to the market and sell things if you want to go beyond your regional or local selling, which you don't necessarily have to do. But if you want to do that, that's going to be a problem. So what did Raiffeisen then do? He mainly focused on two cooperative models. One model was the agricultural cooperatives, and the other model was cooperative banking. At the beginning, he did both. And today, if you want to look at cooperative movement, there is more than these two, because you can have cooperative house building, you can have cooperative buying cooperatives, you can have selling cooperatives. So there's very different settings today, very many different aspects of potential in the cooperative idea. But what happened then, I'm just giving you a little of the background. Raiffeisen lived in the countryside where farming was hard work and brought little outcome and little crop. So what he did was, there was this hunger winter, they call it, in 1846-47. And that was really a hard time for everybody. So he saw that he was a mayor. He was not a pastor. He was not a preacher. He was a mayor of a little town, or a medium-sized town. And he saw that this hunger winter was bringing everybody to starve. So people were really close to starving. They didn't have enough to eat. So what he did was he talked to the wealthy in this village. And he said, you're wealthy, and there are people out there that are dying of hunger. They're starving. So we need to think about how can we help the population, because at the end of the day, this will also hurt you, all of you, because we are together in this. He founded a cooperative association, and they started a bakery. Very simple, something very simple, because people needed bread. And the bakery was not run by a bakery shop owner, but it was run by Raiffeisen and the cooperative association, which he had founded with money from the wealthy people. So he sold bread at a price that nobody else was able to, because he didn't have to make profits on it. So he sold bakery food, bread and things like that at a very low price, so people were able to really buy food, and they didn't have to starve at that time. And then in the spring, he started to buy wheat and potato seedlings, so people could pick up again after this hard winter and start putting out crop in order to get some crop after it had grown. And the way he did that was he bought potato seedlings and wheat to sow in a cooperative management, in a cooperative approach. So when every single farmer would go and buy wheat and potato seedlings, they would charge other prices than when he would go and buy a whole large chunk of wheat and potato seedlings. So he started to catch the idea that common power, putting things together and buying things together, gave you power over price. That's the basic idea that started to develop around in his mind, and he saw that there was power there, and so he developed that idea and emphasized to everybody that this is something that works. And people started to think, and people started to look at it and started to realize, oh, this is interesting. And we are not powerless, but we are empowered. And it's not, I'll talk about that later, by just giving you handouts, because this is not giving handouts. This is something different, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So, and then the next phase in 1849, he realized that if he wouldn't stop the usury banking, so the high interest rate banking, people were not able to sustain their living anymore. So he started a cooperative association with a solidary unlimited liability by 60 of the wealthiest citizens, and they became members of that association. And that cooperative then could borrow larger amounts of money from other banks, which then were loaned to poor farmers at very low interest rates or with long-term plans to pay back. So, and this idea also has a fascinating aspect, because it just doesn't just give money, it doesn't give handouts, it doesn't give donations to people. It doesn't, just bring food trucks and everybody gets something from the food truck. But this, what he does is he values the individual and his and her work. So he empowers the people by taking away some aspects of doing business that were very, very negative to the farmers. Out of that grew Raiffeisen's later and main focus on the coming decades, cooperative banking. So after his first experience in the hunger winter, where he tried to cooperatively buy things and then procure things, he started to realize, I need to do something about, people need to have access to loans that they can pay back themselves, but in a way that is not abusing the people by putting unreasonable interest rates at their faces. So if you look at that, there are some lessons. Raiffeisen's path between different approaches to alleviate poverty is very interesting. So one option that you usually find when you have poverty is you have people who give donations, they give handouts, they help. So you find somebody who will give you money, and then you get the money, and then you have it, and then you can spend it. And after that, what's the next step? You have to go look for more money because it's gone. Now the second option is state intervention in tax finance subsidies. That is what is happening in a lot of Western countries, especially in Europe, I would say, stronger in the European northern countries than in the southern countries, and Switzerland and US have a different system. But that's another option. But it does not really empower the people and bring them to a place where they feel empowered themselves. So they're still getting money from tax. There's some good to this and there's some bad to this. My emphasis today is this is not a long-term perspective, and it may not be the long-term perspective of the Bible for the usual situation. There are in the Bible instances where you have, for example, a common help for widows and for orphans. That is what you find in the Bible. So that is there, because the Bible God says, I am the one that you hurt when you hurt widows and orphans. So because I identify with them so closely. So there is common help. That's not exactly state intervention in tax finance subsidies. It's just a little bit close to that. But it's not really helping long-term. Then The third option, of course, is a communist Marxist overthrow of basic structure of society and making everyone owner of everything. But what does that really help? It does not work. We have seen that over decades, that it does not lead to motivation. It does not lead to really, so why would you work hard when, you know, everything is being passed out to everyone anyway? Why would you save money when the state may just come and take it away? Because as soon as you save, you belong to the rich class, and the rich can be, everything can be taken away from them. So that's not really helpful either. The fourth option is what currently in many evolving and developing countries is happening. It's a subsistence model. So people work and try to gain as much that they can survive the day. That is not a model that is very sustainable. It's not taking you very long. It's not having the spirit of the Bible, in that it does not encourage you to invest, to bring yourself and all your best gifts into the development of a certain wealth, even though it may be very small. But there's very much power in the biblical model, which I will show you in a minute. So these are the standard models that you find out there to alleviate poverty, and they all have limitations. So what Raiffeisen did is he helped people to help themselves without condescension. So he didn't, you know, give handouts, and then he was the big guy who everybody loved because he gave them money, and they worshiped him because he was the money giver. So thank you, Dr. Raiffeisen, you are such a good man. You help us every time we need something. But what he did was he said, okay, people, I don't give you money just, you know, to consume it. I give you money to invest and to build something off of it. And that is a very important part of his idea. So he does not give them handouts, but he asks money back. You have to repay what you get. And that is a very important aspect of his model, because it gives you dignity. It gives your work dignity. It gives your hands and the power of your arms dignity. So that is very important. And it has a community focus, because Raiffeisen's model shows that if you're trying to do it alone, you can't. But if you stand together, if you work together, you're stronger. And that is a very unique combination of aspects which the cooperative movement has brought. So the core identifiers of Raiffeisen's cooperatives in the food and agriculture field is collective self-help. So there is initiative needed. You need to do something from yourself. You need to go find the loan, and you need to go and get the loan, and you need to go and do something. So it's again and again, you need to be initiative. That is very important, because it gives you dignity. It is different than just receiving handouts and donations and help from people. The core identifier number 2 is self-responsibility. So it gives you motivation because you are responsible. You are not just a receiving hand. You are not somebody who is not able to influence his future or her future. So what Raiffeisen says is people need to know they can influence their future, and that the cooperative model guarantees that option exists in this model. And self-governance. So it does not make you a slave, like some of the banks that at that time were taking these high interest rates, and at the end, what was left when the farmer did not have anything else to sell, he sold himself. He sold his family. So it was a modern slavery, 19th century slavery, basically. So what is happening here is you stay the owner of your land. Even though you have loans that you have to repay, you are still the owner of the process and of the land. So you need to work, you need to focus, you need to do something in order to get onwards. So, and then if you go a little further and read Raiffeisen, very fascinating. What he says is local pastors play a key role in this concept, as well as local churches as places of loving control and trust. So pastors, how do they come up? And I'll talk about this on one of the next slides a little bit more. Pastors are very important because they can identify who is reliable. So there is a connection between this model of cooperative idea and the church, which of course has been lost in the secular implementation of cooperative idea today. So if you go to a Raiffeisen bank today, here in Germany and in Austria and in other European countries, there are still banks that call themselves Raiffeisen Bank. Nobody will contact the pastor or be in touch with the pastor even, but they will not be interested in whether you belong to a church or not, or that doesn't interest anybody. So, and I think that is an aspect that they have lost, which has created the need for additional control measures. So Raiffeisen uses that local pastors, local churches play an important role in his concept of cooperative, which I think is very encouraging, because that's what we all basically also understand, that God's church is important, has an important role to play, even in public life, even in banking life. And that I like that idea very much. So now let me show you a few prerequisites or things that need to be in place and principles for successful cooperative work based on Raiffeisen's writings. So one thing that first of all is important, because without this nothing will, you're not able to pull off anything on the cooperative level. There is not a legal framework on the national level for cooperative ideas to be implemented legally. We need to implement, we need to bring it to the country. Most countries, most nations have this in place. Some do not. So you may have to look at first at the legal framework for cooperatives in your country. Very important is that Raiffeisen says that if you need to have well-crafted statutes for the cooperative, and everything that's coming below this bullet point needs to be included in the statutes, and it needs to be considered as you try to develop a cooperative. There needs to be broad membership. Raiffeisen emphasizes it is important for cooperatives to function that you have poor people as well as wealthy people in the cooperatives together, because this will guarantee that it is not going to become a tool of the poor against the wealthy, and it's not going to be an instrument of the wealthy usurping the poorer in the community. But he emphasizes that people from poor people and wealthy people need both to be represented in the cooperative as a constituency. He emphasizes very much that the cooperative needs to be a permanent and stable organization for common activity. It's important that it's not something where people are not sure whether it's going to exist tomorrow or not. So he points out that it is very important that this has a stable organizational setup and is planned and developed thoroughly, so it will have a long-term perspective. He emphasizes, as I've just said, strong involvement of pastors and teachers. So that gives a local focus on it. And he also emphasizes that we need, for a cooperative to function, good and sound leadership. He mentions that there is biblical qualifications for leaders in his writings. So he says, you need to go to the letter of Titus and Timothy to find what is the qualifications for leaders in order to find out what do we need. So these people need to be reliable. They need to have a good, people have a good reputation in the town, and et cetera, should not be drinkers, et cetera. He emphasizes that board members should be volunteers. They should not be paid. If you make board positions paid positions, that will be a potential for problems. So you need to find board members that are willing. I'm just, describing what he says. It may be a little different in your context today when you realize or when you implement a cooperative, but this is just the ideas that he has put forward and emphasized that these are important for successful implementation of cooperatives. So he says it is important to make sure that the board is not paid staff, because what happens if you have paid staff on the board, people are susceptible to being bribed. So you need to make sure that these people don't have any need of money, so that he actually puts the wealthy on the board, because it says the wealthy should help everybody, the community, to develop well. That's why he puts them there, and he says they should not be paid anything, so they will not be tempted to accept bribes. Then he says every member needs to be honest, diligent, keep frugality and hard work. And if that's not applied, so if you have lazy people who are not willing to work, you should, cancel the contract with them. You should get them out of the cooperative, because that is going to destroy the cooperative. So there's also a biblical spirit of work, Protestant ethic of work here implemented in this. He points out that regular General Assembly meetings should be combined with instruction and lectures on living a godly life. So he says the cooperative is also something that should include teaching, education, actually. So even in the cooperative idea, there is education included, which I find very interesting, and did not know that was the case in the original ideas of Raiffeisen. He says nobody should receive dividends or profit shares of the members above the usual average interest rate that you could get everywhere. So that makes that does not draw people who are just looking for money and investment and making profits out of it. So you don't want to have high dividends or profit shares. He says it's very important to have checks and balances in place, and he advises a quadruple power split. So he said there should be an executive board, and there should be a supervisory board, and he defines them very, very concretely, very specifically what they are to do. Then there's a financial clerk, we would probably call him CEO today. That's the only paid position, but this man or this woman does not have the authority to make any decisions, her or them or he himself. So always with the others, never alone, always from the executive board to the supervisory and then to the clerk. And then there is the General Assembly as a fourth body of control, which has power to vote on the executive board, or vote the supervisory board, or even kick out the financial clerk, the CEO, if he's not working properly. So, and that is also very important, a balanced system of checks and power in the power level. Make sure that there is no uncontrolled person that can just do things and give money to some people, and because that will then again be a temptation for bribing. And then this is also interesting. He says in his principles, he says loans shall only be given to people that are living a godly life and have a good reputation in the village. Very simple, but at the same time very hard. So he's not saying that someone who has had a problematic past cannot receive loans, but he says if the person has surrendered and has lived through repentance, that is fine. So the person may apply for loans, and he or she will get loans. But if a person is constantly not living a life that seems to be decent and normal and reliable, and there is a bad reputation, you will probably better not give the loan to that person. And he emphasizes when there is money that is going to be invested by the bank in some other things, he emphasizes very strongly no risky investments. So you never put money into something that promises high interest rates at the risk of losing it all. So this should strictly be forbidden. So what you see is it's an intricate system of engaging people, of requiring activity from people, of controlling the board and the other working groups in the thing, and that leads to a very stable cooperative in place. So challenges. What are the challenges? Okay, obviously, nowadays we have a problem because in the developing countries, there has been a long-term focus on receiving help, receiving handouts, receiving donations. And that has created what we call a learned helplessness. So if you over a longer time, you know, it's like things that you do for a longer time become a habit. And this is also the case for receiving handouts. If you all your life received handouts, if you only received handouts, you at some certain point may say, okay, why in the world should I go do all this, you know, hard work that they're all talking about in the cooperative there? What is that all worth? I'll just wait for the next handout. I'll just get money from someone who gives me something and I'll be fine. So that is a challenge actually to the cooperative idea. Another challenge is in some countries, you have problems with the government and the laws. In India, for example, cooperatives cannot be organized by governments effectively, which they try to do, but it's not very good. What comes out is a government organized cooperative system that is not effective. Cooperatives need to be self-help initiatives by people putting their life into this and by being responsible themselves. You cannot do this from a government side. The other challenge is you need shepherds to oversee the movement. You know, pastors are shepherds. We don't need wolves, but shepherds. There's an article called Friedrich Raiffeisen, and that article brings it down to reality in the sense of you need initiative, winning, exemplary living persons. These are needed. That's what you need in order to create this kind of movement, in order to create this kind of cooperative idea realized in your region. Then, of course, we have a challenge here because you may say, okay, Raiffeisen had the advantage that there were some wealthy people in his village. In my village, there is nobody who has money. So that is, of course, an open question that we can talk about that later, maybe. And I would love to hear some ideas from you. I do have a few ideas how this also can be implemented on a small scale, even when you don't have wealthy people in your village or in your region. But that's going to be a challenge because where do you get the starting money, which Raiffeisen was able to acquire? So let's look a little bit at connections and organizations. I'll just name a few here that so there are organizations like cooperative unions, Apex. There is the GIZ Germany. Some of you may have heard and even worked with them. There's Koika Korea. And these organizations support self-help initiatives in African countries and other countries. Then there is Deutsche Genossenschafts- und Raiffeisenverband, International Raiffeisen Union. There's local specialists like Dan Jansen, who is actually in the call here. He can maybe say a little bit later. There's CSS Farming Nigeria Training Center. There's the Canaan Farmers School in Korea. So there are a lot of aspects already in place where you can go find more information. That's why I'm listing these things here, because you may say, okay, there's Raiffeisen is many years ago, and there's German books out there, but I can't read German. So how do I get this going? How do I find information? So what I'm suggesting is you go through these. You can have the presentation afterwards. I will send it to you, and it can be forwarded to everybody. And there are examples out there that you can go and look at. Examples even of similar initiatives of recent times. One of them is the Canaan Farmers School, the New Village Movement in Korea. There's even a book out. It's called Reinventing Africa's Development, Linking Africa to the Korean Development Model from 2019. It's a very interesting book. I haven't read it entirely, but what I've seen is it really is helpful. It could be very helpful for some of you who want to go a little deeper. Canaan Farmers School is, if you realize that Korea in 1950 was the poorest country on the globe because it had been oppressed and it had been kind of enslaved actually by Japan and others. And there were the people were dying after that war, after the Korean War in 1950. And the movement, this Canaan Farmer School is a very interesting movement because it started in that time when Korea was the poorest place of the world. You know, at that time, Korea loaned money from Uganda, which was richer than Korea. Now, today, Korea is, globally speaking, among the 10 strongest nations on the globe. So something has happened here in Korea. And the Canaan Farmer School is the background to that change, because most people know about the New Village movement and everybody talks about that, but nobody knows, or few people only know, that behind the New Village movement is the Canaan Farmer School. And the Canaan Farmer School is a clearly Christian movement that emphasizes the principles of Raiffeisen, actually. They formulate them a little differently, they put them a little differently, but basically what they have is a mindset of work hard, pray, trust God, and cooperate with each other. So these are some of the key components of cooperative movements of him. And there's some other, the Akili group in Kenya by Harun Bachira. There's the International Raiffeisen Union lists a few on their website. Also, there's a brochure on the German cooperative union website that lists a few of the models. So there are examples where you can go and look at. Okay, that was my presentation for here. And if you want to reach out, you can find me on through these ways.